In this video, I'll share with you why Intellia Therapeutics had a particularly good month, March of 2022, when it comes to their NTLA-5001 program, which is an autologous T-cell receptor therapy against acute myeloid leukemia. And when you combine progress in clinical developments and good news about the progress in clinical trials and ongoing activities, with a declining stock price that has been going down ever since, September of 2021, Intellia Therapeutics may actually be a very interesting investment target for some of you investors. Although I have a PhD in biomedical engineering and over 17 years of working experience in the healthcare industry, I do not intend to give you investment advice. Please consider your own risk profile before making any investments and research your investments wisely. So in fact, in March of 2022, there were two press releases and announcements around the NTLA-5001 program. So let's take a look at those in more detail. We had first, on the 1st of March, the announcement that Intellia Therapeutics announces that the first patient actually had been dosed in the phase 1 or 2A clinical trial of NTLA-5001 for the treatment of acute myeloid leukemia. And in fact, when we look at clinicaltrials.gov, we see precisely 3 clinical studies for Intellia Therapeutics, and the one of interest in this particular case is the recruiting study, or the second listed study for NTLA-5001. So let's take a quick look at what this study is aiming at. As we expect in any phase 1-2 clinical study, the overall goal is to evaluate the safety tolerability of the cellular kinetics of this particular cell type or engineered cell type, and to basically also see the pharmacodynamics of their cell line NTLA-5001. And in this study, they plan to enroll, as we can see here, 54 patients. And this is an open label study, which makes sense, of course, for this type of phase 1-2. And again, these are subjects with acute myeloid leukemia, which had undergone the normal first-line treatment, the standard of care ultimately, and who did not respond to that. So in this case, this study is again sort of a last resort for these patients. And I'd also like to point out that Intellia Therapeutics are breaking again new ground, in the sense that this is a particular type of treatment that has never been done in human subjects before, and this is why this is called is considered a so-called first-in-human study. And it is divided into 2 arms. We see that here, genetic arm number 1 and genetic arm number 2. This study plans to enroll 54 patients in total and has been initiated on November 22nd of 2021 and is expected to run until September 2025, although the primary endpoint is expected actually in November of 2023. And in this particular case, or the announcement that Intellia Therapeutics have actually made, is now pertaining to the first patient who actually received the dosing of NTLA-5001. So this, in fact, is a key milestone and a very first step, of course. Since the initiation of the study in November, certainly they have onboarded the various centers that will then enroll and actually treat the patients. And in this case, the first patient has received their dose of NTLA-5001. So again, this is an investigational T-cell receptor therapy, which targets actually the so-called Wilms tumor 1, which is an overexpressed intracellular antigen that is very frequently found either in acute myeloid leukemia, but also other tumors or cancers of the blood, as well as some solid tumors. So the first indication in this case, is AML, or acute myeloid leukemia, but because the Wilms tumor 1 intercellular antigen also is present in other drugs. So if this study in the end with conclusion of phase 3 will be a success, chances are that it would also be amenable to treating other hematological cancers as well as the applicable solid tumors. So that's very promising, or has much future potential in this regard. NTLA-5001 is an ex-vivo CRISPR-Cas9 genome-edited T-cell, which is also an autologous T-cell therapy in the end. Autologous, of course, means that the cells initially are obtained from the patient himself or themselves. They are then CRISPR-Cas9 gene-edited outside of the human body, and then after sufficient quality control and all the necessary steps to expand those cells, are then reinfused into the patient. For this particular type of ex vivo CRISPR-Cas9 genome editing of those T cells, Intellia Therapeutics are using their own proprietary and advanced lipid nanoparticles and cell engineering platforms, which are aimed at improving actually the cell performance of the infused cells back into the patient as compared to the other traditional ex vivo delivery methodologies, such as, for instance, viral vectors to shuttle the CRISPR-Cas9 genome editing machinery, so to speak, into the cells to be gene edited. This first-in-human clinical study is involving actually a dose escalation phase. And this is broken down, as we can see here on clinicaltrials.gov, into 2 different experimental arms. And there are 3 cohorts within each of those 2 arms. The 2 arms are distinguished by the amount of AML cells in the bone marrow, or the blast count being less than 5% in arm 1. And the difference is that the bone marrow blast count is larger than 5% in arm 2. Again, I remind you, as part of any phase 1 study, it is safety tolerability, but also the appropriate dose is being determined. And this is why there are 3 cohorts, meaning 3 different doses of or amounts of engineered cells that are being infused in each of these 2 arms. The primary outcome measures are outlined here, so it is safety and tolerability as determined by adverse events and dose-limiting toxicities. And this applies to the dose escalation part only. And this is being evaluated from the time of infusion up to 112 weeks post-infusion. And the dose-limiting toxicities, well, of course, here the time frame is limited to 28 days post-infusion. That makes perfect sense. So let's quickly remind ourselves what actually acute myeloid leukemia is. It is, as I had mentioned previously, a cancer of the blood and bone marrow. And without treatment, this disease is very quickly actually fatal and is the most common type of acute leukemia in adults. Now, there are about 20,000 new cases that are identified, or that were identified actually in 2021 in the US alone. And in the 7 major global markets, the data here is from 2020, there are about 40,000 patients that are affected by acute myeloid leukemia. The 5-year survival rate currently stands at actually, unfortunately, less than 30%. And as we have just seen, this is a fatal disease without appropriate treatment. The patient numbers are not that high compared to many other diseases that are commonly being treated. And for this particular reason, well, we come here now to the second good announcement from Intellia Therapeutics. In March 9th, they actually received the US FDA Orphan Drug Designation for NTLA-5001. And that's another big deal because, of course, drug development is notoriously expensive. Now, in most business cases, that cost is recuperated because there's a large patient population that can be treated. And as we have just seen, with about 40,000 cases of acute myeloid leukemia in the 7 major markets, the patient population is really small. And this is where the Orphan Drug designation really comes in handy. If you'd like to learn more about the Orphan Drug status or designation, I leave a link here as well as in the description below to my Health Wealth Investor Toolkit series, where you can learn about this particular type of FDA classification. With receiving the FDA Orphan Drug designation, Intellia Therapeutics will be able to benefit from the regulatory rewards or benefits that apply to these kinds of drugs, which will help Intellia to advance not only faster in the clinical trial development, but also will help Intellia Therapeutics significantly when it comes to commercializing their treatment, provided, of course, that the clinical trials provide positive data. So you can see here the Intellia Therapeutics stock, ticker symbol NTLA, has continuously gone down over the past 6 months, actually for more than that. And well, we have lots of positive news. Also in a previous video, I highlighted some fantastic news from Intellia. I leave a link in the description here. And you can be very certain that, of course, the advancements in the clinical programs, and if positive data continues to pile in, that this eventually will have a profound impact on the stock price. Let me know your thoughts on Intellia Therapeutics in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider leaving a like, and if you haven't, subscribing to my channel.